So I'm gonna be doing a review of James Baldwin's Another Country, while doing my special effects makeup to go along with one of the major themes of the novel. And there's a lot of different themes, but the main ones that I'm going to cover are going to be race, homosexuality, and love. And that's gonna be love in relationships and like for yourself. So throughout the novel, you're kind of asking yourself the same question of, to what extent is this a story of resilience and self-acceptance? And I think it absolutely is. But I kind of think that's part of why I don't necessarily love the book. I feel like every time we have people of color or an LGBTQ plus member um, being represented, it's always in such a victimizing way. And it's not to say they're not, but I just feel like everybody in that genre of writing, including Baldwin, don't really do enough to make their characters more than victims. And you can definitely see that a lot with Rufus's character. Breaking it down, and kind of just starting with the topic of race, um, I didn't really love the book for that reason either. I feel that um, Rufus's character was a little played out, if that makes sense. It just felt like kind of like every other Black story that I've read. So in that sense, it made his character feel super manufactured and just kind of bland. I guess what I'm really kind of getting at with this is that I don't feel like Rufus's character, he was important, but I don't think necessarily he as a person was important. I think just kind of what he represented. I think him being a Black man was kind of what was important for Baldwin to kind of get out of that character the most. Final thoughts. So my final thoughts are kind of just, didn't like the race aspect of the book because everything relies so heavy on Rufus. It does start to play a bigger part whenever you start to talk about sort of the homosexual relationships in the novel, though. Um, and I think you can kind of see a lot of parallels between Ida and Vivaldo's relationship and Eric and Rufus's relationship. And I think Ida and Rufus both are, especially Rufus, you see it a lot. He felt like the love and desire Eric had for him came from a place of uh, superiority because Eric's white. And I feel like Ida kind of echoes that emotion and with Vivaldo because she always she never lets him forget their color differences and that they're different in that sense. And I think that's kind of her way of kind of keeping it in check, if that makes sense. And Vivaldo's definitely not the only one who picked up on that because Eric also kind of notices that about Rufus. And you can see it whenever Vivaldo and Eric are kind of talking towards the end of the novel. And he's telling him about, and Vivaldo's like talking to Eric about how Ida never, like I mentioned, never lets him forget that he's white and she's Black, and and he asks Eric if if Rufus did the same thing to him, and like he asks if he made him pay the same way that Ida makes Vivaldo pay, and he tells him he absolutely did, which is 100% correct. Maybe I'm reading a little bit too much into it here, but I just kind of found it interesting how how Baldwin sort of depicts the Black characters versus like the white characters in that aspect of the was sort of handling the differences between like in interracial relationships. I feel that Baldwin kind of made Ida and Rufus like the more aggressors. And I don't know if that was necessarily, I mean, that's a pretty big stigma around, I feel like the Black community in that sense. But I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into that part. And while I'm on the topic of like relationships, I'm gonna kind of start talking about the third theme, which is love. So, I mean, you know. So, really the message I feel like James Baldwin was trying to get across is that nothing is kind of set in stone, if that makes sense, especially when it comes to things like love and relationships. And I honestly think that all of the cheating that goes on in the novel is kind of hinting, well, not hinting, I think it kind of symbolizes just like how everybody is so kind of uncertain in themselves and in what they want and who they want, and so you see that a lot with Cass and Richard. Her whole life revolves around her husband and her kids, until she cheats on him, and she realizes there's so much more, I guess, kind of to life than she realized. If that's kind of a weak way of putting it, but I think the her fear of becoming a shapeless monster, as she puts it, is a real one, because she absolutely was. There really wasn't a lot to her except her family and her kids. I kind of see a similar thing with Richard, because his whole life kind of revolves around providing for his family and writing, and I think him writing is kind of a similar to what Cass did, as a way to kind of get control of his life, is kind of a way for him to control aspects of his life he feels he maybe doesn't have control over. And Cass feels a very similar way, because I believe on page 122 she's thinking about his writing, and she kind of says she wishes he'd write for money, almost because like that'd be a better motivator. But she knows he actually just writes because he's afraid of everything, sort of deep, like dark and depressing. And I think you see the same thing with Vivaldo. To be honest, I think the whole motif of media throughout the novel, of people kind of using whether it's music or writing to cope, is a really powerful one. And you kind of see that with Rufus too. He's talking to Vivaldo, and you hear Bessie Smith's, I think it's Backwater Blues, playing. It really heavily foreshadows what Rufus is feeling, and what I think a lot of people of the time were feeling. It's about like thousands of people who feel like they have nowhere to go, and they're kind of just out of place no matter what, and it kind of just foreshadows Rufus's ending as well. I mean, so that's kind of just how I feel about the book. Like I said, there's a whole lot of different themes in this book, so there's a whole lot of different perspectives and interpretations you could get. And, I do see the opposite side of what I was saying, because, like I said, I don't necessarily like this book. I wouldn't read it again. And it's not nothing, maybe I'm looking at it a little bit with too much of a modern lens, because, again, it did come out in, like, the 1960s, I think. So so for the time the book came out, I'm sure it was just, I could see why people love it. I guess I'm just really not one of those people. I guess for me personally, the book just didn't have, I guess, the impact he was expecting it to. You look at how complex all the other characters are, and then you kind of look at how basic Rufus is, and considering he's such like an important like idea throughout the novel or whatever, it feels a little weird that he's so I guess minimal. If I'm being 100% honest, I feel like it's maybe written for more of like white people of that time, kind of to get them to understand maybe. I know that, yeah, exactly. And even Cass, she's really bland, and you can tell he did that on purpose. So I feel like maybe he made Rufus so, like I said, minimal, just because he was trying to make it sort of like a familiar character, I guess. The execution of some of it was a little questionable. It's not the the negativity necessarily of the book that kind of pulls me away from it. I don't expect a happy fairy tale ending from every novel. That's dumb. But I think it's just because it feels like his whole point is either like my life sucks because I'm gay, my life sucks because I'm black, or my life sucks because I'm both. Despite all the crap I've given it, I do like the intersectionality. He did portray that extremely well. I'll end it on a good note, and I will say, Baldwin has an incredible way with words. And there's a really good example of that whenever Vivaldo and Ida are talking about, she kind of exposes when she cheats on him, and she's kind of, telling him about it. And even though Vivaldo's being sort of supportive about it, and he's kind of like, "Oh, thank you for telling me," and she tells him like, "Don't be nice about it," describes it. There's kind of like a violent flash of like anger, rage, love, frustration, kind of all of that in that moment. He obviously says it way better than I do, but I think that's just kind of one of the things I did absolutely love about the novel, though.